I've always been the kind of person who tries to make everyone happy, even if it means sacrificing my own peace of mind. Growing up, my parents weren't exactly the warm, nurturing type. They were always working, always busy, always reminding me of how much they had done for me. Not in the way that made me feel loved, though, but in the way that made me feel like I owed them something. Like they were keeping a mental ledger of every favor they had done for me, every sacrifice they'd made. When I bought my first house, I finally felt like I had taken control of my life. I had worked hard for it. Long hours, late nights, and sacrifices I had made when I was younger. All of it had led up to this moment. This house wasn't just a roof over my head. It was a symbol of my independence, my success. It was the culmination of all the effort I had put into shaping my own future, without relying on anyone. The house was everything I had dreamed of, cozy, modern, in a quiet neighborhood, and just far enough for my parents to breathe. My parents, though, didn't see it the same way. They didn't see my accomplishment as something to be proud of. Instead, they saw it as an opportunity to ask for more. It started with a phone call from my mom. She was always the one to initiate these conversations, always the one to bring up the "we've helped you so much" narrative. "Sweetheart, I hope you're doing well in that new house of yours," she said, her voice overly sweet. "We're so proud of you, but, we've been thinking." I could hear the pause on the other end, that familiar hesitation that always came before something I was supposed to feel guilty about. I braced myself. "We've been planning this amazing vacation," she continued, "and we thought it would be the perfect time for us to get away. After everything we've done for you over the years, it would be so nice if you could help us out with the costs. We're looking at a luxury resort, darling, and it's quite expensive." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Luxury resort? Expensive? My parents had always lived modestly, and while they weren't poor, they hadn't exactly been extravagant either. This wasn't a vacation to relax and unwind. It was a vacation to flaunt, to live in luxury, to show off to their friends. And now they wanted me to fund it. "Mom, I'm not sure I can swing that right now," I said cautiously, trying to keep my voice neutral. "I've just bought the house, and there's a lot of expenses I'm covering myself. Plus, I've got other financial priorities right now." The silence that followed was thick. I could practically hear her frowning, her disappointment. Then her voice softened, but the guilt-tripping was unmistakable. "Sweetheart, we've always supported you. We've given you so much over the years. You know how hard we worked to provide for you, to give you every opportunity we could. And now that you're finally able to stand on your own 2 feet, we thought you'd want to give back a little. It's not that much, just a small contribution to help us have a nice time. You've always said you'd pay us back for everything we've done, remember?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were using the same tired line they'd used my whole life. "We helped you. We sacrificed for you. Now it's your turn." It was always a subtle pressure, but it was there, lingering in every conversation, every request. "I understand, Mom, but I really can't right now," I said, trying to hold my ground. "I've worked hard for what I have, and I need to focus on my own future. I hope you understand." But she didn't understand. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "I see," she said, her tone frosty now. "Well, I suppose we'll just have to figure something else out. But it's disappointing. We've always been there for you. And now that you're finally in a position to help us, you choose not to." The conversation ended with my mom's thinly veiled resentment hanging in the air, and I could feel the guilt creeping in. The familiar guilt of never being enough, of never meeting their expectations. But I didn't give in. I couldn't. I had worked too hard to let them manipulate me like this again. That night, I sat in my new living room, my thoughts racing. I had never fully realized how much my parents' expectations weighed on me until I started to break free from them. It was like a constant pressure, a weight I carried without even realizing it. But now I could see it clearly. This was no longer about helping them. It was about them feeling entitled to my success. And that was the moment I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. I wasn't going to let them guilt-trip me into giving them anything. Instead, I was going to focus on me, on the life I had built, and on taking control of my own happiness. The next day, I made arrangements to move forward with my plans. I wasn't just going to say no to their request. I was going to do something that would show them that I was no longer the person they could manipulate. I was going to buy my own house, in a place where I could finally breathe without their expectations hanging over me. It was time to take ownership of my life, my choices, and my future. I didn't waste any time. I knew my parents would be upset, disappointed even, but I couldn't keep living for their approval. This was my life, my future, and I needed to take control of it. So, I went ahead and made the decision I had been putting off for years. I bought a house. It wasn't as extravagant as the one my parents were fantasizing about, but it was perfect for me. It was a cozy, modern home in a quiet neighborhood, far enough from my parents' place to give me the space I needed, but close enough to visit if I wanted to. The price was right, and the moment I signed the papers, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I was finally free. The house was more than just an investment. It was a statement. It represented everything I had worked for, everything I had earned on my own. No more handouts. No more guilt. This was the first step toward independence I had been craving, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. But I also knew my parents wouldn't understand. They would never see it the way I saw it. They would see it as me being selfish, as me abandoning them in their time of need. That was their default response to everything, after all. They had never been good at seeing beyond their own wants and needs. So, I was prepared for the fallout. I didn't tell them about the house right away, though. I wanted to settle in first, get comfortable with the idea of truly living on my own before I dealt with any potential drama. I knew that once they found out, things would get complicated. But I also knew that I couldn't keep hiding from them forever. The day finally came when I couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. It started as a simple phone call from my dad. "I heard you bought a house," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Maybe disappointment, maybe resentment. It was hard to tell. "Why didn't you tell us?" I hesitated. I had known this moment was coming, but somehow, I still wasn't prepared for it. "I didn't think it was necessary to bring it up," I said carefully, keeping my tone neutral. "It's my decision, Dad. It's my life." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear him processing what I had said. "I see," he finally said. "I guess we shouldn't be surprised. After all, you've always been so independent. But, we were hoping for something else from you." I knew exactly what he meant. They weren't just disappointed that I had bought a house. They were upset because I hadn't given them any say in the matter. They weren't a part of my decision, and they felt entitled to be. "Dad, I've worked hard for this," I replied, my voice starting to edge with frustration. "I didn't ask for anyone's help. I made this decision for myself, and I don't owe anyone an explanation." I could feel the tension building on the other end of the line. My dad was always the more passive-aggressive one, so I expected him to throw in his usual guilt trip, and sure enough, he did. "We helped you get where you are," he said, his tone taking on that familiar, condescending edge. "We've always supported you. And now, when we could really use your help, when we've been so generous to you, you buy a house without so much as a word to us. Your mother and I were planning on taking that vacation, but we can't do it without your help." I could feel the blood rushing to my face as I struggled to keep my cool. Was this really happening? They were still trying to guilt-trip me into giving them money for a luxury vacation, even after I had bought a house for myself? "I'm sorry, but that's not going to happen," I said firmly, cutting through his words. "I'm not going to help fund your vacation. I have my own priorities now. I've worked hard for what I have, and I need to focus on my future." There was another long pause. I could tell that he was trying to process what I had said, but he couldn't quite wrap his head around it. "Don't be selfish," he finally said, his voice tight with anger. "You've got your house, your life. What about us? You think we don't deserve a little something, too?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just about the vacation. It was about them wanting to control me, wanting me to feel indebted to them for everything they had done for me. They couldn't see that I was trying to live my life on my own terms, and that was what made this whole situation so frustrating. "I'm not being selfish," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I'm just living my life. I'm doing what I need to do for myself. And I'm sorry, but I can't help you with this." The conversation ended abruptly after that. My father didn't say another word. He just hung up on me. I sat there for a moment, staring at my phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and guilt. I had stood my ground, but I knew the fallout would come eventually. Later that day, my mom called. This time, she didn't even try to hide her frustration. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, her voice dripping with disappointment. "We've given you everything, and now you can't even help us out when we need it most?" I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before responding. "Mom, I love you, but I can't keep living in a way that makes me feel trapped. I've worked hard to get to where I am, and I can't keep giving in to your demands. This is my time now. You think we don't deserve a little something? she asked, her voice rising with emotion. After everything we've done for you? I've always appreciated what you've done for me, but I can't keep paying for the past, I said, my voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside me. I have to focus on my future. After that, the calls stopped coming. The guilt trip stopped too. My parents were angry, but they knew I wasn't going to budge. I didn't know what the future held for me and my relationship with them, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was truly free. Free from their expectations, free from the constant pressure to prove myself, free from the emotional manipulation. The house I had bought was more than just a place to live. It was a declaration of independence, a reminder that I was worthy of living life on my own terms. The silence between my parents and me stretched on for weeks. The calls stopped, and the usual family gatherings turned into awkward affairs where both sides tiptoed around the elephant in the room. It was an uncomfortable silence, but it felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had made the right decision. At least, I tried to convince myself of that every day. I threw myself into my new home. Every weekend, I'd find myself painting walls, organizing rooms, and making the space truly mine. There was something cathartic about it, the act of creating my own sanctuary, independent of anyone else's expectations. I finally had a place where I could be myself without judgment, and it felt like freedom in its purest form. But even amidst this newfound peace, the guilt never fully went away. Every time I ran into my parents at a family event or saw them at a gathering, there was an unspoken tension. They had always been so involved in my life, and now they seemed to be holding a grudge, barely speaking to me unless they had to. It wasn't just the money I had refused to give them. It was the sense of betrayal that lingered in their eyes. They felt rejected, as though my decision to buy a house was a personal affront to their efforts in raising me. And yet, every time I thought about giving in, about apologizing and offering to help them out with their vacation, I remembered how suffocating it had felt. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. They had always seen me as someone they could rely on to fill in the gaps of their own shortcomings. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I wasn't going to be their source of comfort and financial support when they wanted to indulge in luxuries they couldn't afford. I had worked hard for everything I had, and I wasn't going to let them take that away from me. But the hardest part was seeing how it affected my siblings. They were caught in the middle. My younger brother, who had always been closer to me, asked me once why I had done it. Why I had bought a house without telling anyone. He said he understood, but I could tell it bothered him. My sister, on the other hand, sided with my parents, almost as if she were taking on their anger and disappointment for them. I just don't get it, she said one evening when we were alone. Why couldn't you just help them out? They've always been there for you. I tried to explain, but it was hard. How could I put into words something I still wasn't entirely sure of myself? It wasn't about the money or the vacation. It was about autonomy. It was about stepping out from under their shadow and not feeling like I owed them anything in return for their help. I had always been the responsible one, the one they could count on, and I was tired of it. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I had to do what was best for me. I can't keep living for them or for you or anyone else. I have to take care of myself now. She didn't respond right away, just stared at me, her expression unreadable. The words hung in the air between us like an unspoken truth. She was disappointed in me, too. But I stood my ground. I couldn't go back now. As weeks turned into months, things didn't improve much. My parents still treated me like the black sheep of the family, and my siblings were more distant. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt guilty for choosing myself. For the first time in my life, I wasn't apologizing for wanting more than what they were offering me. I had built something on my own, and that meant more to me than anything else. Then one afternoon, I received a call from my mom. It wasn't the usual guilt trip or angry confrontation I had grown accustomed to. This time, her voice was softer, almost hesitant. I've been thinking, she said. Maybe you're right. Maybe we've been too hard on you. I don't know what came over us. We just want you to be happy. And we didn't understand why you couldn't share that happiness with us. Her words caught me off guard. For months, I had been bracing myself for more confrontation, for more hurtful remarks. But this was different. I'm sorry, Mom, I said, feeling a lump form in my throat. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just needed to do something for myself. I needed to live my own life. She was quiet for a moment before responding. I get it, sweetheart. I really do. It's just hard for us, you know? We've always been there for you. We thought you'd always be there for us." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over me. "I'll always be here for you," I said, my voice steady but vulnerable. "But I can't keep living my life based on what you want. I need to make my own decisions, even if that means disappointing you sometimes." It wasn't the perfect resolution, but it was a start. For the first time in months, there was a crack in the wall that had separated us. The road to rebuilding my relationship with my parents wasn't going to be easy. There were still a lot of things left unsaid, and I wasn't sure if we would ever fully understand each other. But in that moment, I realized that I had taken the first step toward healing, not just for me, but for them too. I had built my life on my terms, and while it might have caused some damage along the way, it was my life to live. And that was something no one could ever take away from me. Weeks passed and life carried on. My parents and I still had our moments of silence, but there was a growing sense of understanding between us. The calls were more frequent, though sometimes still awkward, but they weren't filled with the same venom that had tainted our conversations before. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I threw myself into my work and my new home. I had never felt more in control of my life, yet there was a small part of me that still longed for the connection I had once shared with my family. No matter how much I reassured myself that I had done the right thing, I still couldn't help but feel guilty on occasion. One evening, as I was about to sit down for dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was my mom. I hesitated for a second. Should I pick up? Should I just let it go to voicemail? The last time we spoke, it felt like we were on the verge of something new, but I didn't know if we were ready to truly address everything that had happened. But then I remembered that I didn't have to be afraid anymore. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. I swiped to answer the call. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. "Hi, sweetie." Her voice was warm, but there was something in it that made me pause. "Do you have a minute to talk?" "Of course, what's up?" "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began. "And I think I owe you an apology. A real one this time." I wasn't sure how to respond. I had heard her say similar things in passing, but this felt different. She sounded sincere, and her words were more than just a half-hearted apology. "Mom, you don't have to apologize. I know we've had our issues, but No, listen," she interrupted, her voice shaking slightly. "I've been selfish, and I've been so focused on what I wanted that I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I was wrong. I shouldn't have pressured you, and I shouldn't have made you feel like you owed us anything. You've always been the one who took care of everything, and I forgot that you deserve to take care of yourself too." Her words hit me hard. I had never heard her say anything like this before. I had always been the one to shoulder the burden, the one who tried to make things right. But hearing her admit that she had been wrong, it was like a weight had been lifted from my chest. "I just want you to know that I see you now. I see what you've done, and I see how hard you've worked. You don't have to prove anything to us anymore. You've already proven that you're strong, and you've built something for yourself that no one can take away." I felt my eyes welling up. There was something so raw in her words, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. It was a humbling moment. "Thank you, Mom," I said, my voice a little shaky. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for making you feel like you weren't enough." There was a long pause between us, and for a brief moment, it felt like we had both finally let go of the past. The tension that had built up over the years was starting to dissipate, and in its place, there was an unfamiliar sense of peace. "I love you, Mom," I said, my throat tight. "I love you too, sweetie." We hung up shortly after, both of us feeling lighter. It wasn't the end of the journey, but it was a turning point. I knew there would still be bumps along the way, but I also knew that I had made the right decision. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, I had given my family a chance to grow and change alongside me. The next few days felt different. My parents and I began to communicate more openly, and though the wounds were still healing, there was a sense of respect that hadn't been there before. I realized that while I may have disappointed them in some ways, I had also given them the space to see me as an individual, and that was something they hadn't done in a long time. As for my siblings, they were cautiously supportive, but I could tell that they were starting to understand. My brother, who had been the most skeptical of my decision, began to reach out more, asking how the house was coming along and whether I needed help with anything. It wasn't much, but it was something. One weekend, my mom called again, but this time, there was a different tone in her voice. "Sweetie, your dad and I were talking," she began. "We've been saving up some money for a little while now, and we wanted to do something for you. We were thinking of helping you with the house, maybe with some renovations or whatever you need." I was taken aback. I hadn't expected this. "Mom, you don't have to do that. I've got it covered." "No, we want to. We've been thinking a lot about how we can show you that we're really sorry for everything. And we want to help you make your new home even more yours." I was touched, but I also knew I had to set boundaries. "I appreciate it, but I want to make this my own. I've worked hard for everything I have, and I need to keep doing it on my own." There was a brief silence, but then my mom sighed. "I get it. I do. But we still want to contribute in some way. Maybe we can just help with something small. Whatever you need." I thought about it for a moment. It wasn't about the money, but it was about the gesture. I had spent so much time pushing them away, pushing them to understand my decisions. Maybe this was their way of showing that they were finally on my side. "Maybe a new set of kitchen appliances," I said with a smile. "But that's all I'll accept." We both laughed, and the conversation ended on a note of mutual respect and understanding. My parents weren't perfect, but they were trying. And for the first time in a long while, so was I. As I looked around my new home, I realized that it wasn't just the house I had built. It was the life I had created, a life that was mine and mine alone. And that was the greatest gift I could ever give myself.